What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're finally going to be having a look at the sights in this game and how they affect recoil on the guns, because many of them will in fact change your recoil patterns. This is a video that I planned on making towards the beginning of the life cycle, and for whatever reason, I just never got around to putting it all together. I have brought this up in several of my videos, discussing various sights and why I use them, but I never did do this full breakdown, so I thought it's finally time to do this. So what I did is I picked a few guns and I tested a ton of different sights and I put their recoil patterns side by side so we can compare them. But of course, before we get into that, there are a couple things you have to keep in mind when it comes to recoil. With Black Ops 4, they have their predictive recoil system, that's what they call it. And what this means is you will get a predictable pattern every single time you fire a gun. This pattern is tied to the gun and it will be the same every single time. However, there is some randomness still built in when it comes to the magnitude between each shot. So it will follow the same path every single time, but sometimes you get a little bit more or a little bit less. And as a result, when we're looking at this, just keep in mind there is some variance, and therefore hand testing can really only go so far. Having said that, we do see some very clear patterns with the hand testing, so it's clear that there are some sights that will definitely reduce your recoil by a very noticeable amount. So first up, I tested the ICR, and the main reason for that is with the ICR, you can use so many different sights. You can use almost every single one of the sights that are in the game. And as you can see here, I tested from the exact same spot. I did 2 recoil patterns per sight as well. And with the sights that you have the ability to zoom in and out with, I did separate tests for when I'm zoomed in versus zoomed out, just in case there's some changes there, because we have in the past seen changes with sights, whether you zoomed in or zoomed out, like the Varix, for instance, in Black Ops 3. And as you can see, as we play through these clips here of me testing these sights, you will definitely see that some of them have different recoil properties than others. When we compare the recoil patterns of these different sights and put them side by side, you can really start to see the difference in some of the sights. So you can see here, it's very clear that the Recon sight is excellent at reducing recoil. This is why on some of my classes, I will recommend a Recon sight, especially with a Rampart. I really like the Recon on the Rampart. Some people said I was crazy or a noob because I used it on a Rampart, but it is actually insane how much that will reduce your recoil. It is just as effective, if not more effective than a grip. Also, you'll see that the dual zoom sight clearly reduces your recoil by a noticeable amount compared to the base recoil. And then with the other ones, there's either very little change or really no change at all compared to that base recoil. Now, just looking at this though wasn't quite enough, and I wanted some way to actually quantify this change in recoil, but of course we don't have access to the hard-coded stats at this point, and we may never actually have access to those hard-coded stats for Black Ops 4. So the method I used to quantify this was just looking at the overall size of the recoil pattern and comparing it to the overall size of the base recoil pattern. So the numbers I'm about to share are not actually the reduction in your view kick value that you get from the sights. It's just the overall change in the size of your recoil pattern. So as you can see here, with the reflex sight, at least based on these tests, it appears that the reflex sight will add a little bit of recoil to the ICR. Based on my measurements, it's about a 20% increase to the size of your recoil pattern with a full magazine. With the Recon sight, whether you zoomed in or zoomed out, this will cut the size of your recoil pattern literally in half with the ICR. It makes it pretty much laser accurate. With the holographic sight, on average, it seemed like there was no noticeable change. If there is a change, it's pretty much negligible. With the dual zoom, we definitely see a recoil reduction, but it's not quite as much as the Recon sight. I calculated this at roughly 40 to 50% reduction, more like 40% on average, so the dual zoom definitely will help with the recoil pattern. The threat detector sight also seems to improve your recoil just by a very small amount. I calculated a 20% reduction to the overall size of your recoil pattern. And finally, with the NVIR or the thermal sight, I didn't see any noticeable change to the recoil whatsoever. So clearly, at least with the ICR, if you're looking to reduce your recoil, which isn't really necessary with the ICR, I feel like the ICR is already accurate enough, but if you want to reduce that recoil, the Recon sight would be a great option if you like the looks of it, which I personally don't really like the looks of the Recon sight on the ICR, which means there is the alternative, which is the dual zoom sight, and I honestly think I'm going to start using the dual zoom sight a lot more often on the ICR now after doing this testing, because I used to use a reflex sight, and it seems that that's not really a great option for this gun because it does appear to slightly increase the amount of recoil that you get. Now, I didn't want to just leave it at that with just testing one single gun, so I tested a couple others. With the KN57, I tested all of the sights that you can put on that. So we've got the reflex, we've got the Recon sight, both zoomed in as well as zoomed out. We've got the holographic sight, and finally we have the ELO sight. I used the exact same range and methodology as with the ICR. And as you can see here, once again, the reflex sight appears to give a slight increase to the amount of recoil compared to the base iron sights. With the recon sight, again, this significantly reduces your recoil. It's a very noticeable reduction to your recoil, and it is an excellent option if you're looking for that extra accuracy. With the holographic sight, once again, same as the ICR, it appeared to have no change whatsoever to the recoil. And this just leaves us with the ELO sight. And with the ELO sight, I was expecting more recoil because quite some time ago, back on October 30th, we got a pretty big weapon balancing patch, and within that patch, they stated that they slightly increased the ADS recoil with the ELO sight. And since that patch, I've always kind of assumed that the ELO sight had a little bit more recoil than the reflex sight, because on that same patch, they said that the reflex sight got slightly improved aim down sight accuracy. Looking at these results though, it appears that the ELO sight has pretty much no effect whatsoever on your recoil. It's possible that there is some change, but it's highly unlikely you'd notice that change, at least with the KN57. We are going to look at one more gun after this, but when you're looking at recoil values with the ELO sight, it appears to have no noticeable effect on your recoil values. So once again, with the KN57, the recon sight is definitely the way to go if you want to reduce that recoil. And after this, I went ahead and tested the recon sight on pretty much every gun that you can use the recon sight on, aside from the sniper rifles, and it very clearly reduced your recoil with all of those guns. So that is just the go-to if you're ever trying to reduce the recoil and you want basically a free built-in grip on your class. Just use the recon sight if that's something that you can handle on that class. Sometimes I just prefer the iron sights because I don't like that extra zoom that you get with the recon sight. But if you're trying to pick people off at longer ranges, it's definitely a great option for you. Now finally for multiplayer, there is one more gun that I wanted to have a look at, and this is the Maddox. For those of you guys that don't know, the Maddox is the gun that is most used in competitive play. And a lot of people have been asking me, should I run a reflex sight or should I run an ELO sight if I do want to run one of the two sights? Which one is going to give the best recoil pattern? So I put them to the test. I did the base test as well as the reflex and then ELO. And as you can see here, at least with the Maddox, the reflex sight does appear to have the best recoil pattern compared to the other two. So it seems like with the Maddox, the reflex sight will slightly reduce your recoil, whereas the ELO sight looks like it's pretty much the same as the base recoil. Now this is something that honestly you'll probably only notice or see when you look at them side by side like this. In an actual game, you probably won't feel this difference whatsoever in your recoil. And therefore, I would just go with what looks best and what you feel works best. A lot of people like the ELO sight because it's a little bit less obstructive, whereas some people like the reflex sight because it frames the target a little bit better. At the end of the day, based on these tests, I would just say go with whichever sight you feel is best for the Maddox. Personally, I still like the reflex sight on this gun for some reason. I think it's just the way that it frames the target, so I'll probably be sticking to that. But there's really nothing wrong with using an ELO sight if you wanted to on this gun. So that pretty much covers it for multiplayer and how the sights tend to affect the recoil. Overall, like I said, it's definitely beneficial to use that recon sight or the dual zoom sight if you want to reduce your recoil. With all the other sights, you're going to see generally a small and pretty much negligible difference. Now I wanted to have a look at Blackout and how the sights will affect your recoil in Blackout. Now keep in mind, even though we have custom games in Blackout, it is more difficult to test recoil properties effectively in Blackout because there's actually a range limit on when the bullet holes will appear in a wall. If you're too far away, the bullet holes simply won't show up, so I can't show you what the recoil pattern looks like. Therefore, I have to be closer to my target, and therefore you don't get to see as much of a variance. However, I still wanted to show the results that I was able to find with the KN57 here. What I did is I tried to fire roughly 10 shots into the wall. Sometimes it was a couple bullets less or a couple bullets more, but generally speaking, this is a 10-round recoil test, and I managed to test with every single one of the sights that you can put on the KN57. Looking at the final results here, we can see that the ELO sight seems to have really no effect on your recoil. Reflex sight appears to actually increase your recoil a little bit, and after seeing this, I tested a couple more times, and it seemed to be repeatable. Reflex sight definitely appears to slightly increase your recoil. Holographic sight didn't appear to have a noticeable difference on recoil, perhaps a slight reduction if anything. Then we have the 2x sight, and with this one, it definitely seems to have a slight reduction to your recoil, so you have slightly better accuracy with the 2x sight. Same thing goes with the 3x sight. Again, it appears you get slightly better accuracy when using a 3x. And this just leaves us with that 4x sight, which seems to add a considerable amount to recoil. Especially when you picture shooting these at extremely long ranges, which you will often find in Blackout, this will have a very noticeable impact on your ability to hit your target. So it does appear that picking up that 2x sight or that 3x sight is quite beneficial in Blackout for reducing your recoil. But again, that is based on admittedly not perfect testing conditions. That's about as good as I can do as far as detailed testing in Blackout for recoil. But this is actually going to make me think twice about picking up reflex sights, and also I am definitely not going to be using the 4x sight on anything aside from sniper rifles or semi-autos like the Auger, for instance. And with that, that's going to wrap up today's video on how sights affect recoil in Black Ops 4. I'd like to know in the comment section below, what do you guys think about all of these results? Were there any results that surprised you? Do you feel that sights should have an impact on the actual recoil stat of a weapon? Or do you think that should be reserved just for the grip attachment? If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.
Orders are in effect.
Sometimes everything
Mission area secure. Good work.